So good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to take this opportunity to make some comments about the Council's action on the FY24 budget. First, let me say that I appreciate that the Council funded the vast majority of my recommended budget, including the pay for county workers. These included our schools, health nurses, ride-on bus drivers, social workers, firefighters, police officers, and many other dedicated employees. I think everyone recognizes we're in a more competitive market now. However, there have been mischaracterizations that I'd like to address, and I want to put some actual information out for the public. First, despite statements to the contrary, this has not been the most transparent budget process ever at the County Council. I have served on the County Council for 12 years, and this is not the most transparent process I've ever seen. While there were some decisions made quickly at the end of those budget processes, usually representing a tiny portion of the budget, generally between $10 and $20 million, trying to decide which of the programs that remained we could squeeze in, this is a very different process. As Councilmember Mink pointed out in her public statement regarding transparency, the last minute decisions this time had huge impacts. 78.7 million of so-called high priority items were cut after the council had agreed in public that they were high priorities. These final cuts were done in secrecy without any record of which council member voted for or against any of these items. The public has a right to know how people vote. That is a fundamental part of democracy, particularly when we're talking about such a large sum of money. And I would point out that the other category, ironically called priority items, were assumed to be cut. Why would they be called priority if those items were the ones that were most likely to be cut? Additionally, some of the cuts are not real. They are items that will have to be funded. If the budget does not fund them now, they will come out of the reserves at some point later this year. For example, the council's last-minute budget cut of $9.6 million for increased fuel and utility costs. We, like every place else in this country, are facing inflationary cost increases. We have to pay these increased costs for the fuel and utilities. I don't think anyone wants to turn out the lights, turn off the air conditioning and heating in rec centers and libraries, or stop providing ride-on bus service because we're not paying for the fuel. We will pay these costs. Other last-minute cuts to the high priority list include important quality of life items, like funding for sidewalk repair and lighting upgrades in our urban areas where this has actually been a real issue, places like Silver Spring and Wheaton, and rodent-proofing trash cans and recycling bins in Bethesda and Silver Spring so we can cut down on the rat problem. Another cut from the high priority list included funding for overflow sheltering for the unhoused. Without these funds, we will have to decide whether to leave individuals out on the street or go into our reserves again for the funding. This budget also cut funding for small business support, support for climate change assistance intended for businesses and homeowners, and reducing staffing that is needed to improve and speed up hiring, which is particularly ironic since the council made an issue of our pace of hiring. I do want to point out here about our hiring. When we had vacancies during COVID, we didn't fill all of them because we wanted to wait and see how and when we returned to work and what we would need at that point. We were being careful and intentional about not spending money that we knew would not benefit the county. To put it bluntly, why would we hire people if we knew they were not going to be actually going to work? So we waited. We were being fiscally responsible, and the money we didn't spend on salaries shows up as additional money for reserves. We have a vacancy problem that we're working to address, and while we're working on various ways to use our existing positions better, we can talk about that a little bit later. Some council members made an issue of my not doing enough on restructuring, as I had hoped to do at the beginning of my first term. But during the 3 years of COVID, it was not possible nor appropriate to take on restructuring. We did not have a workforce in place. There was no way to bring teams together in a workplace and talk about how we could do things differently. So it's waited. We have the good fortune or misfortune to have enough vacancies that we can have these discussions and most likely make adjustments to staffing levels without having to lay people off, and that's a good thing. Since then, we have begun those efforts in some of our departments, and I want to make sure we also talk about funding for schools and about tax rates as compared to others in the state and the region. I proposed a 10-cent property tax increase to fund schools' unprecedented need. When we started on this budget, and assuming just the basic increase for maintenance of effort, we did not anticipate having to recommend any tax increase. But I recommended the budget to the council, and I spoke with individual council members, and I offered ways to reduce that tax increase by at least 3 cents without doing any real harm to the needs of the schools or to the residents. Additionally, using the school's reserves, which the council did and I agreed with, would have brought the tax rate down to 6 cents. The final tax rate of 4.7 cents leaves us in a difficult situation next year for school funding. By state maintenance of effort requirements, we must provide at least the same amount of funding per pupil as we did in the prior year, plus an adjustment for inflation and student enrollment growth. If I had done what they just did, they would have attacked me for creating a structural deficit. They've provided with the schools funding this year, but required them to use one-time funds to fill the gaps. I've been accused of being fiscally irresponsible, but I'm the one who has been transparent about what our needs are and how they can be funded. I have to explain and defend my actions while certain council members will attack and then support the same policies they criticize me for. And they made big decisions in private, out of public view. I own every decision I made in this budget. My name is on the budget. To use the terms that were used in council session, that this is fiscally irresponsible and puts the county in an impossible situation, those kind of things are just simply not accurate. And I would say impossible is a tad bit of hyperbole. We have a difficult situation. I'm going to be honest about solutions and next steps. We're allowed to have differences of opinions, but the conversations and votes need to be in public. The public had the right to know how council members voted on what would be in the budget and what should be out of the budget. And the constant attacks need to stop. I feel compelled to respond to them because of so much mischaracterization. Some members of the council attacked the superintendent and the Board of Education and then gave them no opportunity to respond, even when they asked for permission to respond. I've never seen anything like that, because you bring the board in front of you and the super in front of you to talk about their budget, and then make comments about the budget, and then don't let them respond, is really not a fair thing to do, and the public would have benefited from hearing the school's responses. The school's needs are real. Our per pupil spending, when adjusted for inflation, has gone down since 2010. Today, we're only spending 80% of what we used to spend on our schools. I hear people say, you know, the schools used to be better, they used to be different. We used to fund schools differently. The difference in our spending is not just in teacher salaries. So while it's great to pat yourself on the back for supporting teacher salaries, it's also program levels and the staffing that we support that makes a difference in a classroom. This chart shows where we were in 2010 compared to today. Almost $3,000 less per pupil, 80% of what we funded in 2010. We are known nationally for the quality of our schools, and that's because we invested in them. We were known for paying our teachers and other staff well and giving them the supports they needed. That requires investment to attract quality staff and to keep them. One of the problems we have, and I'll be pointed about the teachers, is that starting pay in Montgomery County is about $53,000. This will raise it close to $58,000. When the moderately priced dwelling unit program was created in 1974, the purpose of the program was to serve teachers, firefighters, and policemen. One of the things that's happened is starting pay for a teacher would no longer qualify them for the MPDU program, not because their incomes are too high, but because their incomes are too low. Other counties in Maryland now spend more than we do, and this is a glance of a few of those counties. I want to be clear that nothing has changed within MCPS from when I recommended the budget till now. Schools still need the money that would have been collected had the 10-cent property tax been approved. I know that 10 cents was a lot, and I offered multiple times to work with the council on ways to lower that number without jeopardizing the funding of the students and residents. The money we will spend on schools this year versus last year is an increase of 8.5%, which is good, but how it was funded is not good for next year or the following years. On the one hand, it funded salaries. On the other hand, it didn't fund staffing needs didn't allow increases for inflation, which is a problem that everyone is all too familiar with. Whether it's food for school lunches, repair and replacement of equipment, or the rising costs of fuel for vehicles and building and heating and cooling, these increases are real and should have been in the base budget. Additionally, they're going to increase lapses in the schools, which means certain positions are going to go unfilled, which means that classes may find themselves without teachers when subs can't be found, which is another real problem. And this is happening today. I've talked with teachers in multiple schools who have pointed out that when teachers are sick, often the number of teachers who are not able to come to work exceeds the number of subs they're able to bring in. This requires classes to be combined. It requires classes not to be taught by teachers. It requires the doubling up of groups, and this is not an effective way to teach, and it's not fair to the staff. It's really not fair to the students. They're also shifting $30 million of their operating expenses to ESSER. ESSER are the federal funds, and these are one-time funds, and operating expenses are ongoing. So the school system's going to spend $30 million mostly on things that are going to be ongoing expenses, and when the ESSER money goes away, those all still stay in the budget, and we'll be back here now next year talking about how do we raise $30 million to cover this gap. The budget approved this week by the council ignores record levels of reserves that could have been used. Record reserves can also be called budget surpluses. Our surplus is higher than the target of 10% that we set. Our administration is the first to achieve these targets, and last year we ended up with 14% reserves. Additionally, their budget continues to expect taxpayers to foot the entire bill for retiree benefits, leaving untouched hundreds of millions of dollars, $750 million to be exact, in a reserve fund that was specifically created to pay all or part of the health benefit costs. I already noted that other counties in Maryland spend more per pupil than we do. So do school districts in Northern Virginia. And the chart shows that Arlington, Falls Church, Alexandria, Fairfax, and Loudoun County are all spending more per pupil than we do. Fairfax collects a lot more money from their property tax, over $3 billion. We collect about $1.9 billion. They collect more than $1 billion than we do, and they're not much bigger than we are. And they've just lowered their property tax rate to $1.09, which is still higher than what ours would have been had the entire 10-cent tax increase that I proposed been approved. My proposal would have brought us to almost $1.08. The council's rate will be $1.03, significantly lower than Fairfax's newly lowered rate, which leads me to talk about taxes and investment. We have to invest in our county, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, roads, and transit, and even more. We need to continue to make it a great place to live, study, and work. If increasing the property tax is deemed too burdensome for the residents, then we need to look elsewhere. Repeatedly, I have shown that our commercial properties are undertaxed as compared to the District of Columbia and all of Northern Virginia. Both commercial property owners and homeowners are paying higher property taxes in Northern Virginia. At the same time, there are people who say that people don't want to come to Montgomery County because of the high taxes. One of the reporters asked me this at a press conference, and I pointed out, well, they're not going to Northern Virginia because Fairfax and Alexandria exceed our tax rate. In Maryland, Howard County is at $1.25, and Frederick County is higher than our tax rate. So they're not going there. So I'm not quite sure where people think they're going to go to get a lower tax rate than they get in Montgomery County. The reality is quite different from that assumption. I'm happy to note that businesses are coming to Montgomery County, and our unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in 20 years, 2%. For 2 years, I've advocated for measures to allow us to make our income tax more progressive. That would require the state to allow us to go higher than 3.2 cents for high earners, so that we could reduce the burden on lower income groups without losing revenue. I've testified in support of that change for 2 years before the state legislature, but the council, 2 different councils, have not supported that effort. I'm willing to take difficult stands. I want to point out that, and this is what I told the state legislature when I was testifying. I didn't realize at the time how prophetic it was, but I said that if we continue to solely rely on property taxes because in counties like Montgomery, we're at 3.2 cents on income tax, and that's the cap. Then the only place to raise additional money from is from the property tax, which is not a very equitable way to raise tax money, and it certainly doesn't take into account differences in income. Whereas the income tax really raises money based on the incomes that people make and can be made more progressive. I've been asking our private sector to pay their fair share, making our taxation more progressive, but changing the status quo is not easy, and it's not helped by these nasty, inaccurate statements. The fact is that our commercial taxes are the lowest in the region, and the city and counties with higher tax rates are better able to fund their budgets with less reliance on residents. It is troubling to watch large commercial property owners talk about their concern for residents when property tax hikes in reality are going to affect their properties far more than they affect residential property. They're generally concerned about the impact on commercial property, not on what residents are going to pay. And in fact, they're willing to pay more in Virginia than they are here. How much more, you might ask? I'll just give you an example of what's in Fairfax County. Their tax rate was $1.11. It might have gone down to $1.09. They have a tax on all commercial property. I want to emphasize all, of 12.5 cents in addition to the base tax rate. They have a 3% tax on businesses on their gross receipts. 3% is the cap. Some get paid less, but the county has no gross receipts tax on businesses at all. We collect no income taxes from businesses here in Montgomery County. And Fairfax County and the other counties have special taxing districts. And in Fairfax County, in Tyson's Corner, the combined weight of the property taxes on commercial property in Tyson's Corner is around $1.60. Montgomery County, 99 cents. A big difference. And you can see and you can imagine what they're able to do with those revenues in Fairfax County that we can't do here. We're a big county, but we're not acting that way when it comes to investing in our schools or in our infrastructure in general. It remains our best asset and the biggest part of the county's reputation, which is a large part of why people want to come here and raise their families. For us to allow it to slip to the point where we're spending 80% of what we spent in 2010 is a mistake, and the council just compounded the mistake. It took care of part of the salary differential. It did not deal with the structural differentials in terms of staffing and programs. So to conclude, I'm thankful that more money will be going towards schools, and that's a win. I'm glad that 98% of my budget remains intact, but I'm disappointed by how we got there. Our community deserves the best schools that we can give them. Doing this is a half measure that kicks the can down the road and sets us up for more challenges ahead. We can handle the challenge, but going forward, we have to be honest and transparent about the real issues and real solutions. Thank you for taking the time to listen.